You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Times pictures mother and daughter, Judith and Natalie Reynan, who were freed tonight by their Hamas captors. The Reynans are also on the front of the eye. Suggesting an invasion of Gaza could be imminent, the Mirror has the headline, "Deadly Weight." The Mail meets a young woman conscripted into the Israeli army from her job in an ad agency who's about to start fighting for her country. The Financial Times reports that Israel intends to sever ties to the Gaza Strip once the current conflict is over. The Telegraph reveals that a planned terror attack in the UK, allegedly by an asylum seeker and linked to Gaza, has been foiled by the authorities. The Express hears that Conservative insiders reacting to last night's double by-election loss believe the best way to win back the electorate is to demonstrate so-called true blue values. While The Guardian quotes a victorious Sir Keir Starmer, that Labour is redrawing the political map. And The Star offers pearls of wisdom from an AI chatbot that apparently believes all humans are aliens living on a planet run by Elon Musk. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Wallis Simons. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Times and that breaking news this evening, the release of those two hostages, mother and daughter, released, we read, as an act of goodwill by Hamas. Front page of the Times, Susie.
Yeah, Joe Biden's going to be very happy that his visit to the Middle East seems to have produced some kind of results and that the first hostages are being released. Now, there's an estimated 200 people being held by Hamas. This is only two. But it seems like these are US citizens, not Israeli citizens. They were there visiting family. They seem to have got caught up in the attacks. And it does look like, as well, the mother, Judith, had some health concerns and that she was being released, therefore, on humanitarian grounds with her daughter. But as we were saying before we came on, it raises lots of issues about, the humanitarian concerns of those hostages who are 80, 90-year-old grandmothers, who are young children without their parents, perhaps, who are perhaps all deeply traumatised, who are perhaps even Israeli soldiers who are wounded. On what grounds do we say that, they should also not be released and taken back to their families? And so there are other efforts going on, other nations speaking to the Hamas leadership, which is based in Qatar, to try to get as many people out as possible before this suggested ground invasion, which, we'll get onto, but may or may not happen in the way that's expected.
But, Jacob, positive news provides some hope.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously, any hostages coming out is definitely good news. These two are American citizens. There's no suggestion they're dual nationals, Israeli, American, just Americans. The deal was brokered by Qatar, which is also working on around 7 British hostages to try and help free them as well. So perhaps there's a small glimmer of hope that maybe we might expect or hope for some British hostages to come out as well. I don't think the same hope could be held at the moment for any of the Israeli hostages, that's for sure. But it's interesting, there's some details here, including that initially Hamas wanted to release them in exchange for a ceasefire, but those demands were rejected, and in the end, they were released with nothing given in return. That's a significant point, I think. But overall, it's just devastating for all of those hostages. But, this is a small glimmer of hope in an otherwise very dark time.
Yes, and Biden thanking the government of Qatar for their role of mediation, which we read that they continue to carry out. So let's hope that yields more releases. Let's have a look at the Mirror. Their headline, "Deadly Weight," and this is as to whether the tanks are ready to roll in on the ground. Some suggesting that the release of the hostages might be a token to stop this actually happening.
Well, obviously, Hamas, if they're giving over hostages in return for apparently nothing, want some goodwill. and they want that goodwill from the international community. Now, the international story around this that's being woven at the moment is purely, mainly about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The hostages have been a second item on the agenda, if you like. And so the fact that they're being used or they're being released or they're being, exchanged in return for some kind of attention or gratitude or thanks or anything else that may be coming out of it indicates that, yes, there's people on both sides who would like to firstly move them out of harm's way, but also perhaps to use them as what they are, as tools to try to buy some kind of influence. But I don't really buy. I mean, I'm just not certain about this idea of a ground invasion. The Israeli government said within 24 hours that they wanted to go in and to do that in Gaza. It's been 2 weeks and it still hasn't happened. They've mobilised lots of reservists. They're in a situation where, having said it, it will be very difficult not to do it. But at the same time, if they go rolling into Gaza, then the chances are that Hezbollah in the north will open up a new front from Lebanon, and maybe even that Syria would try and retake the Golan Heights. You could end up, if you started a very messy urban bit of warfare, that you would have multiple fronts opening up, and Israel would then be fighting for its very survival on all sides. And I think that with the changes in the government we've seen since this happened, Netanyahu has brought in Benny Gantz, the opposition leader. There are now more moderate voices within the Israeli cabinet who weren't there before. I'm not entirely sure that it's going to proceed in the way that it was predicted on day one. I don't think that's going to happen.
I mean, as you allude to there, it does seem that there is a reluctance to go in on the ground. Just moving to the FT, and that's talking about the three-stage plan of the war. And that the third phase is to cut ties with Gaza completely, we read.
Yes, I mean, I think that the hostage release is interesting on another count, which is that Hamas... This is, in a way, a PR disaster for Hamas in many of the eyes of the Arab world, because it was so brutal, and it was what they did to those Israeli civilians was so horrendous, and it wasn't done with the knowledge of any of the Arab world, which they're now calling upon to become their allies and support them. And there's a lot of discontent there, as we've seen in various interviews conducted on Arabic TV recently. And so you could read the release of these two hostages as some kind of attempts to reclaim some kind of legitimacy on the part of Hamas. But from the Israeli point of view, they have no option. Hamas has got to go. They cannot live with this terror threat on their border, having seen what it can do to them and what they will do to their civilians. Even more relish, if that's possible, in the killing of Jews than the Nazis showed all those years ago. Israel cannot allow that to continue. I think there is going to be a ground invasion, as the Defence Minister pointed out in the story here in the FT. The first phase is going to be destroying Hamas via an air assault and a ground invasion. Then there's going to be the elimination of pockets of resistance in Gaza. And the third step is the most fascinating, I think, which is to cut ties with Gaza, which just goes to show that the idea that Gaza's been an open-air prison for all this time hasn't been entirely correct, because there have been 18,000 Gazans coming into Israel to work. There's been electricity, fuel, water and so forth going from Israel into Gaza. But the idea that Israel is going to cut off those ties implies heavily that Israel isn't intending to reoccupy Gaza. Don't forget, Israel withdrew in 2005 entirely. And so that, I think, in my mind anyway, has got to be good news, although what comes instead, nobody knows.
Well, that is the question, because they wouldn't be able to cross over to work in Israel. There'd be no movement at all. They wouldn't supply electricity. I mean, this is a complete severing of all
Israeli
ties.
public opinion tends to be that there should be an occupation of Gaza. I don't think it would be practical. It would be logistically really possible. But there's a groundswell of opinion that should happen, especially in the wake of these attacks. But if they cut off ties subsequent to any conflict, the chances of it then becoming a hotbed again of terrorism, I would think, is fairly high. And it's not going to remove Hamas in the way that is required. And so I can't see how some of the rhetoric is going to marry up. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the Israeli government before this was frail. and it was hardline, and it produced an awful lot of public protests in Israel from Israeli voters who really didn't like the coalition that had been cobbled together by Netanyahu. And I think with the discontent over the security failings, which meant they didn't see this attack coming, and now perhaps it not really doing even what the hardliners want, not going in straight away, leaving it 2 weeks, perhaps cavilling a little bit about some of the things, but how they're going to handle it, maybe that government could fall very quickly.
OK. Just to mention, we didn't get to the Guardian, but just on the humanitarian lifeline into Gaza still remaining closed, despite that, well, reportedly being opened up, but that still hasn't happened. We're going to take a break. Thanks very much for the moment. Coming up, should the lesson the Tories take from their double by-election defeat be that voters want them to go further to the right? We'll discuss that and more next. Back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Jake Wallis Simons. Let's take a look at some domestic news now. The by-elections. A buoyant Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, is over the moon. More than happy at the results of the by-election, perhaps beyond his wildest dreams, to win them both. Susie.
Well, sort of any political geek, really. So it's one thing that the Conservatives have said, look, it's a by-election, coming to the end of to an electoral cycle. This is the kind of thing that you expect. And yes, you do. But in by-elections, when the ruling party loses, it generally goes to the vote of a protest party. So you go to the Lib Dems, whether it's a Labour or a Tory seat. Often goes Lib Dem. It's gone UKIP in the past, or Reform. It's gone, to a party that's sort of just adjacent to the ruling party, perhaps. But what's happened here is it's gone to the directly opposing party, to the opposition, which doesn't happen very often at all. And the last time, I was looking up today in the list of by-elections, the last time the Tories lost to Labour with a swing this big was 1994, I think it was West Dudley by-election. And that's the only time it had happened since the end of the Second World War. So this swing is slightly smaller than that, but it is historically shocking for a government to lose to the opposition. It would be like Blair losing to the Tories as opposed to the Lib Dems. It is very, very bad. And it's getting to the point now, I think, where, Rishi Sunak, he's had a big reset. He's had party conference. He's decided he's going to do some things that are unconservative, like banning smoking, while at the same time very conservative, like scrapping HS2. He can't cut taxes, he can't raise taxes, and he's going into this last year before the election with literally nothing else left to do. And I tend to be of the opinion that what the Conservative Party is going to do probably is just sort of sow the ground with salt on their way out the door, because they literally just want to, especially the way they ended HS2, not just to end it, but actually destroy it ever being reanimated again, is kind of more about now not saving themselves, but making it impossible or making it harder for Labour to rule.
Let's just get Jaking, because we're running out of time. But do you see this result as a definite shoo-in for Labour, that Sir Keir Starmer will get behind that door at number 10?
Look, it's looking likely. If it was projected, if this result was projected nationally, it would be a massive landslide. It would be a Blair moment. These are historic results. Tamworth was the second biggest Tories Labour shift since 1945. And the other one in Mid-Bedfordshire was the biggest margin in any record to be hauled back in any recorded UK election, according to The Guardian. Sunak, he's looking desperately for some tax cuts. The tax burden is the highest that we've had since the Second World War, and people are feeling it. Combined with the cost of living crisis, it's hurting people in their pockets. But the solutions he's looking for are either cutting stamp duty, cutting inheritance tax, both of which benefit middle class, middle-aged, well-off, or perhaps bringing down the tax for high earners, which, again, that small number of people is benefiting.